Vox Markets Podcast with Justin Waite.
Joining me today is Sachin Oza, Co-Chief Executive of Reabold Resources, ticker RBD. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Sachin.
Thank you very much for having me.
So perhaps you could start off by just giving our audience a little insight into Reabold to those who might be unfamiliar with the company.
Yeah, so Reabold's strategy is in upstream oil and gas projects. Typically, at the point where we make the investment, it's in the pre-cash flow stage, but we would typify these low-risk subsurface opportunities. The capital we provide to those projects leads to near-term drilling and what we believe is a quick cycle time to monetization on success. Since Reabold's been going, which is a little over 2 years now, Reabold has helped fund the drilling of what will be 9 wells, as we've got 1 well actively drilling in our portfolio currently, of which we've had 7 successes, and hopefully this next one will also be successful. And we have 4 that are on production. And all of that, I suppose, just highlights the strategy that we'd stated at the outset and the actual delivery and execution of that in a relatively short time frame. We continue to see opportunities that exist in that space, and we believe it exposes our shareholders to the most significant uplift in value in that part of the overall upstream oil and gas value chain.
That's great. So yesterday you had news out concerning the West Newton appraisal well. If you could take us through that'd be great.
So it was really an update on the planned extended well test, and it was just highlighting some of the key aspects. And as a reminder, when this well was being tested and suspended back in August of 2019, August of this year, it was because there was a substantial amount of oil or liquids that was seen in the well. And in order to really focus the test on the liquids as opposed to the gas, we suspended the program and redesigned it to focus on those liquids. Bearing in mind, by the way, we did flow gas to surface from that, or got gas to surface from that original original well test. So the objective now, though, is to focus on oil primarily because it is higher value to the joint venture partners and Reabold as well. And by focusing on the oil, it will then inform the ability for the upcoming 2-well program that we have later this year in order to optimize production from the oil zone in the overall reservoir unit. So that's a bit of a summary of what the strategy is behind this extended well test. So what we're currently waiting for in the near term is the appropriate regulatory approvals, but all of the key equipment to really focus on that oil test has been purchased and is ready to go. And as soon as the regulatory approvals are forthcoming, the equipment will be mobilized to site and we will recommence the extended well test.
That's great. And as I understand it, the cost of work is within the original well test budget, right? That is correct. So this is not incremental in any way to that original plan. And as you pointed out, it just means that we can carry on as per the original budget, but just with a slightly different test program for the extended well test. That's great. And the statement also detailed planning permissions in place for 2 additional wells. Could you touch on this a little bit?
So just in terms of the overall field that is West Newton, it's worthwhile reminding the listeners that this is one of the biggest onshore discoveries made in the UK. So it's a very sizable field. There was a thick section of pay, which is overall this approximately 65 meters that's also referenced in the announcement. And what the objective here is to find the sweet spot in the reservoir unit for this Cadabby Formation that will optimize the production rates from what will be ultimately deviated wells that will be the producers on this field. So The objective here is to use the information we get from this extended well test, information from the first well in the upcoming program called West Newton B1, to help inform how to optimize the drilling of B2 to be a producer. Now, it's worthwhile saying, though, that the B1 well will also be testing a deeper Cadabby target, which will be what we believe will be optimized in terms of the location for reservoir development. So the Cadabby Formation has been tagged in previous wells. It just was not optimized. It was not an optimal place in terms of that reservoir development issue, but we had plenty of oil indications in that formation. If the B1 does find success in the Cadabby, then the plan for the B2 may change to focus on the Cadabby as the producing well next. But we have enough flexibility in the program and planning in order to change that relatively short notice should that be required.
I see. And the Cadabby Formation is detailed specifically as quite a highly important and high-value target. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so the Cadabby volumes are, almost double again of what we had in the Kirkham-Abbey Formation. And it is predominantly oil again. So it sort of lifts the West Newton field to a whole new level, despite the fact it's already such a significant discovery. And therefore, we're just retaining the flexibility of the forward program, depending on what happens in that Cadabby Formation on the results of the B1 well.
Of course. And there seems to be this increased interest in Rathlin. What are kind of the short or even longer term implications of ramping up interest specifically here, which I understand the company has over the past year?
Yeah, so we completed a capital raise, and as part of that, it was increasing our exposure into Rathlin, who is the operator of the Pedal 183 in which West Newton resides. And the objective, the reason we did that was primarily on the basis that we realized this was an oil field rather than a gas field. The importance of that is that the capital investment required to get that into production is much lower for oil than it is for gas, and is suited to Reabold's strategy. So by increasing our exposure, allowing the funding for these next two wells, the B1 and the B2, which is what that fundraise did, fully funded the program for two upcoming wells. We did that by increasing our exposure in Rathlin, and therefore we'll hope to be able to take this to the stage of significant cash flow generation with the funds that we've raised to date. And that was the thinking behind it in the medium term. But because this is such a strategic asset, while it's in that cash flow generation phase, we can then evaluate what is the optimal way to recognize value from West Newton for our shareholders. And that doesn't require further capital, which is the really exciting thing about this oil discovery.
That's great. And just separately, I wanted to quickly touch on last week's announcement, which concerned the start of drilling operations in California at West Brentwood. Could we touch on this a little bit and development here?
So to take another step back in California in general, we have drilled 4 wells there and we've had 4 successes, and those wells are on production. We have taken California to the stage now where all incremental drilling activity has been funded out of cash flow generated within that business unit. And so this has now become a self-funded entity for growth. This well, called the VG6 well that we're drilling on the West Brentwood license, which is the most prolific license that we have in California, is focused, again, with the objective of maximizing cash flow from that asset. The results, will be due very soon, and if we get that onto production as we would expect to, given the performance that we see from VG3 and VG4, if VG6 is successful, it will then uplift the cash flows yet further, and in all likelihood, provide greater cash than we could deploy within California for growth. And is something that we'll have to evaluate as and when. But first, let's just wait for the results of the VG6, and then in time we will appropriately design the strategy
to manage that significant cash flow generation from California.
Of course. So 2 really exciting developments coming up then. What exactly can we expect from Reabold coming into 2020?
Yeah, so we've touched on the West Newton side of things, which essentially is this extended well test as West Newton B1 and West Newton B2. And we've described how that is such a significant element of moving the asset forward and being a significant milestone for Reabold to reach within in terms of that asset. The other things probably worth pointing out outside California is in Romania, where we made a discovery there in the IM1 well. That was a gas discovery that exceeded our pre-drill expectations and has a best case estimate of 20 BCF of resource there. But because that was larger than we expected, the focus now is on how to create value on IM1, because as a standalone project, it has strong and robust economics in its own right. That would mean either for a project like this, building a short gas pipeline to tie into a nearby gas processing facility, or potentially creating a gas to power solution because we have nearby electricity connection and the region we're in is hungry for electricity. So we have the extended well test in Romania that will then help inform what will be the development plan for that discovery. But we will also be planning the second well in Romania called IM2 for later in that year. In the meantime, what we're hoping is we'll be having California humming quite nicely, generating the cash flow, funding incremental wells, and as we said earlier, we'll be deciding how best to deploy the excess cash flow that exceeds even the growth that we see within California as that evolves over the course of next year. So it's a portfolio of extremely exciting opportunities, significant in scale, at the point of cash flow generation, and hopefully demonstrating an execution of the strategy that we stated at the outset of this discussion.
That's great. Now, just to close off, Sachin, could you give our audience 3 reasons to add Reabold Resources to their Vox Markets watch list?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we've touched on all of them, but it is Reabold Resources is an opportunity that exposes investors to a significant amount of activity. The activity is material to our share price. We have shown the ability to be able to take pre-cash flow assets to the point of value recognition and will continue to do so from the assets within our portfolio. But we also continue to see opportunities beyond that that are complementary to positions we have and new options as well. And while we see those sets of opportunities, we think we can create substantial value for our shareholders. So those are the 3 key reasons we think that listeners should follow Reabold Resources and look forward to an exciting 2020 ahead of us.
That's great. Thank you so much for coming on, Sachin.